So finishing up chapter 5 with these important sodium content terms, because these are RD exam questions, so you can guess that they might be on the midterm. So very low sodium. If it in label says very low sodium, this means that it's less than 35 milligrams per serving. Low salt or sodium, you might see on a label, means less than 140 milligrams per serving. Reduced sodium means it has at least 75% reduction as compared to the original. So reduced sodium doesn't necessarily mean, low sodium, because the original could have a ton of sodium and then a reduction of 75% is really not that much of a difference. Unsalted means there's no salt added. And sodium free or salt free actually means there's less than 5 milligrams per serving. And also unsalted or no salt added doesn't mean that there's not salt that naturally occurs, because there is some sodium that naturally occurs in certain foods. So types of salt, we'll run through these really quickly. Sea salt is going to be obtained from the seawater, and it's actually a preferred salt because it's very pure and it has a mineral-like taste. So a lot of times that people will recommend using sea salt because you have to use less of it because it's such a pure flavor. Rock salt is derived from ancient seabeds and that have dried up underground. I don't see rock salt too often. It's usually used just like to put oysters on. Table salt, this is going to be rock salt that is fortified with iodine and contains additives to prevent caking. So this is your typical salt that you see. And iodized salt's important because we need iodine in our diet. But because a lot of foods contain this, you are probably getting it even if you're not using iodized salt. But it's always good to be careful and switch up your salts. I like to do sea salt, table salt, and kosher salt, depending on what I'm making. So kosher salt is rock salt with no additives, and it's preferred by professional chefs because it's flaky crystals and easy to pick up with your fingers. I personally like kosher salt for baking, sea salt for cooking, and table salt just because I want to make sure I get that iodine here and there. And then there's also flavored salts like garlic, onion, and celery. If you're buying garlic powder, make sure it says garlic powder and not garlic salt, because if it's garlic salt, you're getting sodium as well. So there are different functions of salt in foods, and these are important. It can be a flavor enhancer, which is probably the most known function of salt in foods. And our bodies do need sodium chloride, so it's actually great to have salt in foods. It's a preservative, which we've talked about before. It's a binder. We actually talked about all of these a couple slides ago, now that I'm thinking about it. But I think we didn't talk about color aid or fermentation control, so I'll cover those. So it can be a color aid for processing foods such as ham, bacon, hot dogs, and salt, and sausage, because the color is preserved with the use of salt. And then fermentation control, well, bacteria and yeast are sensitive to salt concentrations. So salt is actually used to control their growth during fermentation. So it doesn't mean that it will prevent fermenting, but it won't, it'll make it a little bit harder to ferment, so you won't get too much fermentation too fast. Some other types of seasonings and flavorings, herbs and spices. I think we covered these in this week's class for lab, but herbs are plant leaf valued for the flavor or scent, and spices are derived from the fruit, flower, bark, seeds, and roots. Then there's also flavor enhancers, or MSG, which provides its umami flavoring, which we definitely talked about, found from an amino acid. Marinades. So these are added liquids to flavor and tenderize, specifically meat, but can also be made for vegetables as well. And then other ways you can do this is with breading and batters because they help retain flavor and moisture. Condiments are seasonings or prepared relishes. So your ketchup, your mustard. And oil extracts are obtained from natural sources such as flowers, fruits, leaves, bulbs, barks, buds, and nuts. And you can't see this, it's cut off, but I'll move it down. So vanilla extract. So this is an oil extract. It's considered pure if it contains 35% alcohol by volume. So you want pure vanilla extract. Do not buy imitation vanilla extract. You always want to get pure vanilla extract. And really what vanilla extract is just vanilla beans that's been soaked with alcohol to get a vanilla flavor. So other ways for seasonings and flavorings are rubs and pastes. So a rub is when you make a blend of seasonings, usually dry or fresh herbs, that is rubbed on the outside of something, typically a meat. But a paste is the same as a rub, but it's moistened. So it has some lemon juice, oil, butter, or mustard in that. And that sometimes makes it a little bit easier to spread on the food. Breadings, you always want to season your breading first to really give flavor. And breadings can be made of flour and eggs, and sometimes breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs. Batters, on the other hand, have water or a liquid involved, and starch and seasonings. And eggs, specifically egg yolks, provide like a nice deeper color in a batter. Oil or shortening can add mouthfeel and flavor to a batter as well. So this is the breading process, and this is not something you will be tested on, but it is good to know that you want to first roll in flour, and you always want to have one dry hand and one wet hand. So whichever hand you dip into your flour, you don't want to dip into your egg. That's a little food service tip for you. And then, so you dip it in your flour and then your egg, and then you can dip it in breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs, or you can even dip it in more flour to get that crust. And here is just this is just the difference between breading and batter. So breading is when you are dipping in flour and then egg and then breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs or whatnot. You can even finish with nuts. But batter is when you're mixing together the flour and a liquid and then dipping that in the batter and then deep frying typically. So it's important to know when to add seasonings. You want to follow the recipe, but the main thing I will always tell you, the difference between, I read somewhere one time, the difference between a home cook and a chef is a chef will season as they go. So whenever I'm making food, not that I consider myself a chef, but I guess I am professionally trained. Whenever I'm cooking food, like when I saute my onions and my garlic, I add some seasoning. When I add my wet ingredients, I add seasoning. When I add my meat, I've seasoned that previously. And it really makes a difference in the development of the flavor. And then another thing you can do is add fresh herbs at the end, and that really brightens up the dish. Or a squirt of like lemon or lime, a little drizzle of vinegar, that really can make a fatty dish taste a lot brighter. So food presentation. We'll talk about this next week with menu planning, but you want to kind of have a variety of colors, shapes, sizes, textures, and flavors. And whichever your main food item is, that should be at 6 o'clock on the plate. And then food should be placed to achieve balance. Here's a very important thing if you do your F&P project in person. You always want your hot food to go on a hot plate. So place it in the oven, on top of the oven, just to warm those plates up. And if you are serving something cold, you want it on a cold plate. So salads, your plates should go in the refrigerator first to chill them so that you don't wilt your greens the moment you put them on a plate. Make sure your plate is large enough. And then you want to group your foods in odd numbers, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. It really makes a difference aesthetically. So garnishes. Garnishes is what you add to your plate after it's done cooking to really enhance color and design. But one of my biggest pet peeves is when a garnish does not go with what the food is. So it should reflect the flavors of the dish you're presenting. And it should always just be edible. They do make edible flowers, which are so beautiful, and they don't really taste like much, so you can use those for garnish. But in particular, you really just want to garnish with things that are going to taste good with the food. So if you are making tacos, you might want to garnish with cilantro. If you are making some type of Italian sauce, garnished with basil. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I see a dessert that has mint on it and it has no flavors that go with mint whatsoever, just because they want the green on there. To me, that doesn't make sense. And so here is what I'm talking about with your presentation. So you could see the main dish is at 6 o'clock, and then they place their starch and their vegetables. And it's a mixture of different colors. There's plenty of room on the plate. That's what you want to aim for. And then you could see plating, really you want to go with the odd numbers. So those 5 beautiful asparagus topped with some white. There's a little bit of purple in there and a little bit of yellow. And then your scallops here, 3 scallops. There's orange and red. So those are both really beautiful plates. And my guess is that they would all taste really nicely together. So that is finally it for chapter 5. I know this one is a lot, but it's really important framework for the rest of this semester. Please let me know if you have any questions at all.